This is Inner Healing Paths podcast. Here we discuss the healing of the mind, body, soul, and spirit through a variety of different paths. We have emotional and spiritually minded conversations centering on ancestral healing, psychology, astrology, yoga, meditation, magic, and indigenous spiritual practices of the world. I am your host, Rosa Shetty, and I am so happy you are here. Welcome. Welcome back to another episode of Inner Healing Paths podcast. I'm your host, Rosa, and this episode is titled on Decolonizing Mental Health and Healing Intergenerational Wounds and Imposter Syndrome with Claudette Mestayer. So in this episode, we talked about so many different things. We talked about decolonizing mental health, decolonizing the classroom. We talked about imposter syndrome. We talked about healing our inner mean girl. So for those of you that don't know Claudette is a licensed mental health therapist. She specializes in helping women who are struggling with substance abuse or healing from trauma, especially those from marginalized communities. As a reminder, I do want to let you know that this episode does not treat or diagnose any physical or mental health condition. This episode does not substitute for healthcare or mental health services of any kind. Guests have a right to share their opinion and perspective, and this does not constitute an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Also, I want to remind you all that if you like what you hear and you find it helpful on your healing journey, please share about it on social media or leave us a review. It really helps to be able to reach more people who need this type of healing or this type of information to help them on their healing journey. So thank you all so much for your support and for listening. So now we're going to go into our interview, and I hope you enjoy this. I hope you find it healing. So take a listen.
Hi, Claudette.
Hi.
Hi, welcome. Welcome to this podcast. Thank you for agreeing to be on.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Especially after looking at your meeting through social media and looking at your Instagram, I was like, wow, I really vibe with everything that is being said and on your Instagram, and I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, same, likewise. And thank you so much. So to get started, so tell us a little bit about yourself and the healing work that you do.
Let's see, where to begin. I'm Claudette. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Oakland. I was born and raised in the city, San Francisco. And I work here in Oakland on Ohlone land. I am also a professor at or lecturer at UC Berkeley, and I teach social work stuff. A little bit about me. My family is from Nicaragua, and they came here escaping war. And I always mention that because I think it's a big part of my story about being a product of war, even if
Absolutely.
even if I was born here and came after, but I'm a product of war here in the United States. And I grew up and being a family coming from war, I grew up in a family that struggled a lot with trauma, unhealed trauma, and that looked different for different people. My brother struggled with and continues to struggle with addiction and severe mental health issues. My dad also struggled with alcoholism and also abusive, behavior. My mom also struggled with depression and anxiety, and and, you know, people in my family struggled with a lot of anxiety and untreated trauma in many different ways. And whether that came out through violence or mental health issues or addiction, that's what I grew up in. And I grew up with my grandparents. They helped raise me. And so a lot of my healing modality comes from my ancestors and my family, and what they went through. And so I work with people who have experienced trauma, and I work with first and second generation immigrants. I work with people of color, and I work with the LGBTQI plus population. And really the what I focus on is trauma treatment. And that can look so different in so many different ways. I think that, you know, we think about therapy as this end all be all thing about ways to heal. And for me, I'm because I want to honor my ancestors, and I want to honor my my like indigenous roots. It's really important for me to decolonize therapy and decolonize social work. And so that means defining healing in very different ways, and not in very narrow defined ways that are, you know, that actually don't have definition or don't have like a set pathway. And so that's my perception or perspective on healing. And I think the other piece of it that's really important for me in terms of decolonizing is recognizing systems and systems of oppression that impact clients. I think sometimes mental health can be this very individualized thing where it's like you are dealing with individual mental health symptoms, and you have individualized trauma, and we forget that actually like trauma is systemic, and that mental health symptoms are actually symptoms of systemic issues. And so a big part of the work that I do in terms of healing is recognizing systems and how we've internalized systems, and then and trying to dismantle that. That's why I talked about decolonizing, right? That's like a system of oppression in capitalism, right? Colonization and white supremacy. These are systems in white supremacy and capitalism systems of colonization. And so just kind of really being able to unpack that for people, I think is really important, because this isn't just about the individual and it's more than that. And healing is collective. It's not just individual. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That totally resonates with me also, just because, and just this podcast, it's the reason why, I call it inner healing path, is because there are so many paths that lead to healing. And it is a very much a layered process, because you mentioned just in your life story, there's the generational trauma. There's also, you mentioned there was a war, which is why your family came to the US. So that's a layer in and of itself. And then you come here and there's that, the colonization mentality, and then for you as a social worker to be able to, what I get is that you're kind of taking a step back and looking at all of this, right? Your life, your family, where you come from, your ancestors, and then of course the community or the societal systems of oppression, which adds to the trauma that we've already experienced on an individual level. Right? So it's such a layered and that's why it's such a complicated topic, really.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And I think particularly for people who have experienced trauma, have been kind of separated from like community or from our own self even. And I think that part of healing is kind of figuring out who we are under it all, and connecting with our like community, to to find ourselves a little bit, I think. And it is very layered, right? Because it's like the individual, then the family system, then like the society, the economic structure, right? Like the political system, like it is very layered, and so there's a lot to dig through. But I think sometimes it's I think when we think about like Western therapeutic ideals is like the individual, and like how are we going to help you like heal from within and find your like and figure out your symptoms and help you, right? And I think sometimes what gets lost in that is it's actually not just that. It's not within, it's also without. It's both. Yeah.
And I think that's also just that concept for a lot of folks that we work with. I think it's very empowering to realize that it's not just them, that it's not just because of what has happened in your life, but there's other elements that are so beyond your control. But understanding that and having the awareness of these other elements and other layers can be very, very healing on an individual level. It's just actually, now that we're talking about it, it's one of the reasons why I decided to go into social work, is because of that person in the environment perspective. Because I mean, at least when I was going to school, it was the focus was on understanding how an individual functions within the different systems. Of course, the individual system, but more so the family system, right? The immediate groups. I think they call it meso, right? Meso system, and then the macro, of course, which involves all of this that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think just kind of thinking about how they all intertwine, and I think like, and I think it's like thinking about like healing, and you think about like evidence-based practices and what that means. And I think for me, I think like, yeah, I obviously use evidence-based practices in my work. I use motivational interviewing. I use CBT. I have been really dying to get trained in IFS because I think it's a very powerful tool. It's very difficult to get trained, but I've taken some trainings on that, and that's an evidence-based practice. And I also use some somatic stuff. But I think like the other thing about this is that there's more to healing than just evidence-based practice work. And I think like that is a big part of it too, is like, for me, it's like, I want people to reconnect with their roots and who they are. Sometimes like the world that we live in like separates us from our culture, from like our food, there are like the people, the language, right? The rituals. And so like really reconnecting with that, I think, is so important. And even if it wasn't part of your family, just reconnecting with the power within you in a different way, I think is really important. And so like, I think for me, it's like really important to be really open-minded and flexible about that, like what that looks like for individual people, and offering that to people. Like, we can talk about it, we can do these tools, we can do these things, but like there's other ways to heal, and that it can be done within therapy, but outside of therapy, right? Like there's so many other ways to heal. And whether that's like, seeing like a healer, like a traditional healer, or whether that's like doing, like your own kind of rituals around like cleansing, or, finishing something or ending something, right? Or a grieving process. Like, I think that those things are really important as well. And I think I'm bringing this up because I think that, asking about healing, it's like, we do talk a lot about therapy, and I think therapy is great, but it's not the end all be all. There's like so much more. That's one aspect of the healing, but there's other aspects of the healing as well.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that, I firmly believe is that it starts with awareness, right? Awareness, and then setting the intention to have these other things, not just therapy, also be healing, so, just, I don't know, let's say diet, you're changing your diet can be healing in and of itself as a trauma survivor, to be able to say, I'm going to nourish my body and take care of my body. But a lot of it has to do with the intention. So, you change your diet with the intention of healing versus change your diet because I need to look a certain way by a certain time. It's so the intention can really make all of the difference, right, when it comes to healing. And I think sometimes having or talking about it with people and bringing awareness to this is in and of itself can guide in their and guide them in their path and what is next, right? So I've done the therapy and so maybe reconnecting with my roots, right, through food or taking a trip to my parents or my grandparents' land, or something in that regard. Is the intention that can really, really make a difference in terms of helping yourself heal from whatever has happened.
Yeah, and I think that's so important when you talk about food, because for me, it's like one of the ways that I like take care of myself is like making like food from my culture or like food from different cultures, like but using intentionality around what I'm doing in the kitchen. Like I'm creating something, and sometimes it's a new dish and sometimes it's an old dish, but it's like creating something out of nothing. Right, here's a bunch of these ingredients, putting them together, and like really being intentional, like when I do that. And also like doing part of my self-care is like cooking and dancing at the same time, and like what music am I listening to depends on my mood, but like it's intentional like taking care of myself. And I think that that's the other part of healing, right, is how do we take care of ourselves? I think that in talking about this, I think sometimes it's like there's this it's like self-care has been marketed as this like like spa day, or
exactly,
indulge yourself in something like that, and we forget like the really basics of self-care, which is like are you sleeping well, are you drinking enough water, are you nourishing your body, and are you moving your body? And I say movement instead of exercise because like movement is just being able to be in your body and use it to whatever capacity it can. And like sometimes we forget those basics, and we think we're taking care of ourselves by doing these other things, but like we're not actually taking care of ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these are things that are free, right? I mean, you can drink water, I mean, it's just like a lot of times we're conditioned to think that self-care means spending money, on a manicure and pedicure and going for a massage and all that is wonderful and great also, but you don't that doesn't have to be the only way of self-care. There's things that are accessible to you in this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like one of them is like just stepping outside.
Yes, right. Taking a breath.
Yeah.
Deep breath.
Taking a breath.
Yeah.
I love that one, right?
Like conscious, intentional breath, right?
Yes, I love that, right? Like just in the moment, being able to just breathe in and just, oh yeah, I'm here in my body. And just like, I think like it's interesting because what you said about, spending money, I think that's right. Like, I think that self-care has like really been capitalized. And so that often means that like, it often disconnects people from what it means to take care of yourself, because it's like, oh, well, that means I need to like spend money or buy something, or I need to, same thing with like, I need to buy organic, or I need to be, whatever it is. And in actuality, right, that's just like this capitalized version of self-care, when in self-care can be the little things of just taking that breath, or checking in, am I thirsty? Did I drink enough water? Like maybe I need to get one more hour of sleep tonight, or right, maybe I need to do some stretching. Maybe I need to just go outside and like be in the fresh air for like a couple minutes, right? And it's those things
Absolutely.
that really help us heal.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I hope that, for our listeners, I hope that take this as a reminder, to just breathe, drink water. I know every time I hear someone say drink water, like literally it makes me want to drink water in that moment, like, oh, that's right, I have to. So this is your reminder. And let's go back a little bit to what you were mentioning at the beginning. So you talked about decolonizing, sorry, social work and therapy in general. But I know that you're a social work professor, and so how does that look like from your perspective, from being at the university and just being in that arena? How is that changing, or how is that looking these days?
Oh, that's interesting. So I think for me, part of decolonizing social work as a professor is several things. Really being authentic as possible. I do not code switch. I curse. I am myself in the classroom. And because like like these ideas of like professionalism are rooted in like white supremacy culture. And so for me, just really understanding white supremacy values and how they show up in our work, and combating those in the classroom. And so what that means is like, right, what does it mean to be professional? Like I don't need to prove that I'm professional or that whatever. I have the knowledge, I have the experience, and that's what I'm there to share. I also don't take a top-down approach. My classroom is very egalitarian. Like I'm checking in constantly. I'm like, okay, so should we just chat in a larger group, or should we do little groups? Like, how was always feedback informed? Like at the end, how would this go? If there's any feedback, let me know. The other thing about that is, I really want my students to bring themselves to the work. I mean, to the classroom. So I have them engage in all of the class, just engage in this, in an activity where they are kind of showing how they use creativity in their healing or recovery, and just so that they can show their true selves and be authentic in the classroom. I think the other part for me is, so, and it's hard because I think like you think about how we grade as in an institution, and grading, if you think about it, has a lot to do with classification, right? And classification is like rooted in colonialism. And so I think for me, right, like I really make sure to tell people like the assignments, the work, it's not for me, it's for you to practice. And what matters is that you're here learning and doing your best. That's what matters above all else. And especially at an institution like Berkeley, grades can be like really triggering for folks. And so I really try to like unpack that, and like that this is a place of learning. And if you're here learning, if you're here giving it your best, that's what matters. And that at the end of the day, what matters is like the knowledge that you're gaining to take away to then do the work, to do social work. The funniest thing about this though, I think is when people call me professor. I think it's hilarious. I think it's funny when people call me professor, because and there's different reactions to it. I think people do it out of respect and stuff like that. And I'm like, if you want to call me professor, you can call me professor, but really like, I'm like, my name is Claudette, and we can, and I'm Claudette, and I'm a social worker like you. And so I really try to dismantle the top-down authority and top-down authority way of kind of teaching, and really make it like an egalitarian space where we're all contributing, and we're all in this learning environment together. And I think that's really important. I you know, again, I think for me, being a professor or a professor is really just about teaching. It's about, and it's about engaging people. And that's what matters most to me. It's like, what am I doing to support the developing clinicians that are then going to go into communities like the communities my family lives in, and the community that I'm a part of. And that's
exactly.
Yeah.
Modeling really what it needs to be in when we're working with folks, you know, in the community, like you said, because, you know, that's what social work is. You know, social work is not about memorizing facts or theories and names of author, or, you know, it's about connection, right? It's about empathy, radical empathy. It's about starting where the client is. You know, that's what one thing, you know, that they really focus is like, you start where they're at, you know, you start where the client is. So as you know, in your role, it sounds like that's what you're modeling for them. It's like, I'm going to start where you're at. You know, I want to hear where you guys are at in this moment. Do you want to have a large discussion? Do you want, you know, so I think that in and of itself is more valuable, you know, in terms of learning. Social work that's more important, especially when you're out in the field, when you're working real life. Those are the skills that you really need to carry, right? Is that really that deep understanding of where they're at, the community, the people that you're serving, and just meeting them where they are at, not where you want them to be, you know?
Yeah. And I think, and you saying that, I think modeling is exactly the right word. And I think, you know, it's like, radical authenticity is so important to me, and being as real as possible is so important to me, because that's what matters in the work that we do. Right. Like part of what I say that is the purpose of my work is to empower people to be their true authentic selves. Right. And I, you know, in order to do that, I have to embrace my true authentic self and not be someone that I'm not. And I think oftentimes when I am working with, students of color or young students or non-traditional students, a lot of the anxiety comes from, I feel like I need to know it all. I feel like I need to be a certain person when I'm in this role that is not me. And then what that leads to is like imposter syndrome, like stress, work stress, and ineffective like treatment, because you are so caught up with, I need to present this certain way, that you're not able to actually be in the moment with your client.
You can't connect, and people, and that's an energy. I think it happens at an energetic level where they can't connect with you. People feel. I'm talking about the, you know, just clients, folks. We feel the vibes. We feel energy. You know, so when someone is presenting in a way like you described, just not being authentic, not being real, you feel it right away. And if you're trying to help that person, how receptive are they going to be to someone that is just telling them or not being authentic or genuine? Not very, I mean, they might present okay with you and be cordial and nice, but it doesn't mean that the work is resonating with them or actually helping.
Yeah, you won't be able to connect on a deeper level. And actually, like so I went through this myself. When I went to Berkeley as an undergrad, and then I worked in like the education system, like as a college advisor. I worked at like in San Francisco, some high schools in San Francisco, and then I worked for like 2.5 years at El Cerrito High, and I primarily worked with young people of color, and kind of just supporting them. And when I applied to Berkeley, like I actually wasn't going to apply to Berkeley. I was very, I was very nervous about applying to Berkeley. I didn't think that I was going to get in. But a mentor of mine said, you went to Berkeley. Why wouldn't you apply to Berkeley? Like apply to Berkeley. I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to Berkeley. And when I got in, I was shocked and I couldn't believe it. And I also, had struggled with imposter syndrome. I felt like they had made a mistake or that I didn't really belong. And so my first semester at Berkeley, being one of the, like in the smaller cohort, not the larger cohort, but being like one of the most visible, like one of the only visible people of color, in that very smaller cohort, I felt incredibly uncomfortable. And I felt like I did not belong. I felt like I should not be there. And because of that, I hardly spoke. I didn't say anything at all. And in class, and I couldn't even look people in the face. I was extremely awkward and tense and anxious. And it was so difficult for me. And I always tell people this, but it was to the point that at the end of that first semester, when I was warming up a little bit, one of my colleagues, one of my classmates, was a little tipsy and was like, oh, she's like, when I first met you, I thought, wow, like Berkeley really does value diversity. They accepted an autistic person into the program. Really horrific, on so many levels. I mean, just for saying that. But,
exactly. Right. And this is someone that was a part of your cohort, someone that was in school to. Okay. Oh,
yeah. And that's, and making assumptions, or that's neither here nor there,
but just saying this to you. Yeah.
And so then that's when I really like after like there was a break and I realized I cannot continue to live my life like this. This is hell. And so I came back spring semester and I was like, I'm going to be my full authentic self in the classroom.
Good.
And that's what I'm going to do. It took me though a lot longer to be able to be my authentic self in the workplace. I was working at Kaiser and I felt like I had to be a certain way, working, meaning I was an intern and it was like a paid internship, my second year. And I felt like I needed to be a certain way. I needed to talk a certain way. I needed to know everything.
Yes.
I struggled a lot. And I learned a lot too. I learned like, I cannot be something that I'm not, if I'm going to be an effective clinician and if I'm going to support people in their healing process.
Absolutely. But I think that's one of the beautiful things about going into this line of work, this healing work that we do, is that as we are helping others indirectly, I feel like just life, capital L, has a way of bringing or showing us what we need to work on ourselves. So, I don't know if it has happened to you, but just as an example, like when you're going through something, all of a sudden you get clients that are dealing with the exact same thing. And it's like, as you're hearing yourself talk, it's like you're listening to this like wiser part of you. And you're like, wait a minute, I need to apply that to myself, So I feel like, sometimes we are put in these situations where we can't ignore it anymore, So being in these environments that you described or with this classmate, it's like, it kind of is in your face to the point that it's like, I can't like not do something about this. I have to take care of this for myself, for my healing, for my growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I think, and part of, and so, right. And I think that's, it's just kind of like, you can't, comes a point where it's so much pressure to keep being who you're not, that it's not possible to that's
absolutely. You mentioned the code switching, right? It's another, I just came across this term. I've had an awareness of it. I just didn't know it was called code switching, but it's like work, like what you described. It just reminds me of this constant just switching your true self for this version that you think you need to be, right? So you put this other persona, this other part, right, to take over, but this part just feels so is so much pressure to keep putting up this front for
Yeah.
the sake of the comfort of that environment that you're in, or to fit in, or whatever, you know?
Yeah. And I think, and that's that's also part of decolonizing the work, right? Is like that, you know, your true self is your best self. And these ideas about like professionalism, rooted in like white supremacy, rooted in capitalism, and like, and these oppressive structures, really like hinder our ability to heal and our ability to help others heal. And so I think part of the work is, you know, is learning how we've been colonized to decolonize, right? And like part of how I was, you know, part of how I was colonized is that for me, that I felt like to be a professional, I had to talk a certain way, I had to dress a certain way, I had to show up a certain way. And that I couldn't be myself because myself was not good enough. And I had to really like learn to let that go. And when you talk about modeling, that's what I model in the classroom, and that's what I model to my clients as well. Like, I am unapologetically myself at all times, and that does, and some people may not like that, and that's okay. I have to recognize that, like, I can't be liked by all. Like, I can't be everybody's cup of tea, because not everybody drinks tea, and I can't be you know, a white professional, because I'm not a white professional. I can't do therapy like you know, a middle class you know, white person, because that's not my background. I have to be the professional that is me, Claudette. And I think that is another part of really really like decolonizing the work is around that. I mean, and the same thing goes with kind of like, you know, with image, right? Like, you know, hair and how you dress and things like that, I think is another aspect of that, about decolonizing, right? It's something that I think is really important for healers to know. I because I encounter it with my students, I feel that you know, because I hear it from them, right? I hear that fear of like, I don't know how to be myself in these spaces where I feel like myself isn't the right way, or myself isn't good enough. And clients feel that all the time in their workplace, in right, in their relationships and whatever. And oftentimes, like, so much of like stress happens from we are not being who we are, and in whatever capacity, right?
Absolutely.
Whether that's like, you know, whether that's like internalized homophobia as well, right? It's like not being true to our gender or our sexuality, not being true to just being who we are. I think is a big struggle for us in this very oppressive like system that is governed by capitalism, white supremacy. It doesn't really, it's a struggle to be who you are in this system.
Yeah, and you know what, the most ironic thing, you know, with all this is that the more you look within, the more you decolonize and you really look at these systems of oppression from a more critical, you know, standpoint, the more you do that work, you realize that it is such a spiritual process.
Yes.
On an individual level, right? To decolonizing, you know, in the sense of that you eventually come back to yourself, to that full acceptance that I am good enough as I am. The idea that I'm not, or that I need to look a certain way or have certain, you know, eye color to be attractive, or, you know, whatever it may be, right? That is a product of colonization. But when you are able to let go and kind of go to the center and peel all these layers, you find yourself, your true self, your authentic self, which is ultimately your medicine, right? When you're as a healer, you know, as a social worker or your therapist, whatever that is your medicine. That is what you have to offer, you know, in your healing work. And it's the irony, right, that it's so it's like your perception is so clouded by all of these layers that it's hard to see your true medicine, which is what you were put in on this path. Because I believe, you know, if you're on this path, this healing work, which whatever path it is, there's a reason, right? You're not just, okay, I'm going to choose. No, there's a calling, right, that is involved in this.
I absolutely think of it as a calling. Yeah, it's definitely a calling. And I think that's the thing. I think sometimes we might be blocking the medicine that we are in different ways. And we may not even know that. Right. But I think you're right. The you know, the power that we hold in ourselves has been so shrouded and hidden because of the world that we live in. And the healing is coming back to ourselves, and recognizing that the power that we have within, and our healing power within, I think is really important to acknowledge. And, you know, I think, you know, in going along with this, like, you know, I've struggled with my own mental health issues, and I think a lot of folks in the field have had either their own personal experiences with mental health stuff, or with mental health issues, challenges, realities, or in their families, right? That they've seen. And like, for me, I think that that's the other thing about the authenticity, is that you know, that we don't want to acknowledge that we have also struggled, and we have also suffered in this way, right? And like, I think that it's so important to recognize our own humanity, that we are humans, and humans suffer. That's part of our life. And that in actuality, that suffering is a strength when helping others heal. And that's why, for me, like, I wrote an article about my struggle with postpartum anxiety and like lifelong struggle with OCD, and post-traumatic stress disorder. And, you know, I use that. I use my own experience with struggle and suffering, and I use my own family experience with trauma in order to help myself heal and help others heal. Like, that experience is my medicine as well, for myself and for others. And I think that's the other thing, right, is there's so much shame around that, and that shame disconnects us from the medicine that we are, right? And so I think that's another piece of unpacking that, and kind of decolonizing, is like letting go of shame around these things that make us who we are.
Shame, oh my goodness, that's a whole other, you know, thing, and it's a whole other episode. But shame is just, I believe it's at the core of so much that we go through as individuals, whether it's with trauma, or your family of origin, or where you come from, you know, and, you know, especially for you know, for those that you know, people of color, a lot of times with that, you know, code switching that we're talking about, the imposter syndrome, a lot of times when we really dig deep, at the core of it is that deep sense of shame. Like, who am I, you know, to do X, Y, and Z? I am, you know, and you know, if you only knew, right? Like, if they only knew that it's all just a front, you know, it's these how can I say, like the cassette, right? Just keeps playing over and over and over. And when we really are able to take a look at shame, and you mentioned IFS at the beginning. For those that don't know, IFS stands for Internal Family Systems, and it's a therapeutic approach that I practice with my clients, and it's such a profound, it's such, I feel like it's just a lot of wisdom there, right? And that's not just like therapy, evidence-based, but just so much ancient wisdom, because our ancestors knew this. I mean, that's again another topic, but from an IFS perspective, it's shame. It's a whole entity, and it's a part that can really run the show. It could really run our lives. And when it comes to what we were mentioning, the work with the client, not feeling like we can be real, like we have to cover certain parts of we can't really talk about our own struggles. We're feeling like, you mentioned your postpartum and writing this and finding this as your medicine, to help others by sharing your story. So many people can't do that, and I'm talking professionals. They it's like they still sign up or subscribe to the idea that I have to be like a blank slate in therapy, or a blank slate is, and I'm, the top bottom approach, like I'm good, I'm perfect, I'm here to help you. You are the problem, and it's like, no, like there's a reason why we're in this field. There's a reason why we do therapies. You went into psychology, social work, marriage and family therapy, whatever it is, there's a reason why you were called, whether, and a lot of times it's our own experiences, our family, but there's always something. And those that say, no, I'm good, I just want to help people. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know about that, because I mean, they may not want to talk about it, and that's great, but you can't say we all have, our stuff that we have to work through, and life just has a way of whether we want to or not, life will make sure that we work through what we need to work through in this lifetime.
Yeah. And I think connecting with that humanity is so powerful, with our own humanity and our own suffering, and connecting with another person in that is so powerful. And it, it's not to say that, it's like, for me, it's just about like, I want to be able to share my story and share my narrative, so that others can connect with it or learn from it, or also be empowered to share their story, and not keep it, and not shroud the work in like this, like, oh, we got it all together. Because that's actually, if we haven't struggled and then how can we provide adequate empathy, or how can we provide, like, how can we try to understand the people that we're working with if we ourselves haven't struggled or worked through our own suffering and healing. And
exactly.
I think, yeah,
understanding pain, right? It doesn't have to be your exact pain,
yes,
or issue, but pain is such a universal, emotional pain I'm talking about, right? It's such a universal theme that if you feel like you've never experienced that, then how could you possibly understand someone else's pain?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I really do love the IFS model in that, like, recognizing the different parts of ourselves. I think there's a part of me that still often questions, like, who am I to be doing anything? Like, what, who am I? And questions like, am I good enough? And, and what will other people, like,
absolutely,
what will other people think, and what will other
yeah. Claudette, thank you for being so genuine and authentic, in this space, because I feel the same way. And I feel like a lot of times, people in mental health and, just, or in general, right, professional, don't acknowledge that because, one, of shame, right? We were talking about shame, and sometimes we feel like, well, no, I don't want to be looked at like something's wrong with you. I don't want, but that's reality. And I think we all have that part, that imposter syndrome, or that part, that mean girl, I heard, I think it was, I don't know, a book, or I read it. It's like this mean girl within, and it wasn't a therapy book. It was just like a self-help book, but it was such a clear picture of, like, we all have this mean girl within us, right? And that just, like, it suddenly comes out. Doesn't matter how accomplished you are. And I think even at some point, even Oprah said that she struggles with this from time to time. So I think she was talking with Michelle Obama. I don't remember. It was like this,
Yeah.
and they were just like, yeah, like, every once in a while we feel it too. And it's like, okay, if Oprah and Michelle Obama have this mean girl, like, of course I have a mean girl, and it doesn't matter, what I've done, or it doesn't, there's this part within us that every once in a while comes up. Some of us have this part come up a lot more often and runs the show, and all some of us that maybe have done a little bit more healing have it not so often, whatever it may be, right? But it's there, and we all have it, and it's important to acknowledge that for for our listeners. It's like, yeah, we all struggle. We all have this mean girl that says, who do you think you are to be talking about this topic, or to be, doing this?
Yeah. And I think learning to kind of acknowledge what's happening there is still a work in progress for me. But like, because sometimes I think, when that mean girl comes around, she can be a little loud and kind of really,
yes.
yeah.
I hear you on that. Yes.
Yeah, and beat me down, and and I think, and I've done a lot of my healing work about being self-compassionate and accept rated with IFS work, just like accepting parts, and I think acknowledging like that part may exist, that part may be protecting us from the criticism of others. It's like, let me criticize you before other people criticize. Let me tell you before other people tell you, which is going to hurt more, right? It's like, and so this kind of acknowledging like, okay, this part may have been created when I, at certain different parts of my life, and as a way to protect, or as a way to manage, whatever's happening, and so and it's still a work in progress, but kind of acknowledging that sometimes for myself is like, okay, like this part of me needs to be heard a little bit, and needs some acknowledgement, and that I need to understand where that's coming from, and yeah, that's why I do IFS. I love it so much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Being able to identify when this mean girl, or this part within you comes up, that's a lot of times half the battle, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to therapy and healing, is like, oh, there she is, right? There, for me, it's like, oh, okay, I see you, I acknowledge you, okay, but you know what, we're good. To be able to do that, it sounds so simple, but that's like, I don't know, for me, it's been like it was the moment I realized, like, wait a minute, there's a part that I can talk back to, and then I can like notice and become aware, and like that was a game changer, right? So that's one of the beauties, we talk about therapy, and it's not the end all be all, but if you are in therapy, if you're listening to this, that's part of the healing work that we do in therapy, right? Is to be able to have someone else outside of, our mind point things out like this, right? Because that's what we do. A lot of times it's just like pointing out things that we see, because the reality is that someone outside does, and it could be a friend also, it could be a loved one, your significant other, but a lot of times people that are more, there's a little bit of emotional distance, a lot of times they're able to, or at least I should say, not a relationship, a personal relationship, sometimes they're able to see things that we are not able to, because we have these blind points, right? Which is normal. I mean, it's normal. That's us being human, right? So when we open ourselves to help from others, a lot of times simple things like this can be like life-changing insights.
Absolutely. And I do, like, I think one of the things, I know we're coming up on time, but I wanted to and this
go ahead.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Some of the things that we're talking about could be
no, I know. It's been, we've been having great conversations. So
But I wanted to say that, like, another thing about my decolonizing work and coming back to my authentic self has also been about, like, in talking about parts, and is like really connecting and offering compassion to my inner child, and to the wounded child within me. I think like part of compassionate self-compassion is like, how are you talking to yourself? and oftentimes the mean girl's like talking poorly to yourself. And then, and you're talking poorly to yourself, but then you're also like the ideas of like professionalism again, or ideas about what it means to be an adult is like, sometimes that means you push away that like playful, fun, childlike part of you. And that is another thing that I think is so important in my work. Like, I am always playful. I'm always humorous. I bring humor to the classroom.
Absolutely.
I like play like in my lectures, I play TikToks that are like, just like funny TikToks that have to do with like making fun of social work, or like, I bring that to the work that I do with clients. And like, even now as we're talking, like I'm like playing with a little toy. This is like my little fidget. It's like a little slug. And I'm like, it's like my fidget toy, but it's also like a little toy that I play with. And I just think that's I wanted to just say that, because I think part of our
playfulness, yes, it's so important.
Self, right, is like our inner child, and connecting with that,
exactly,
and that's part of ourselves. And sometimes when we talk about professionalism, or we talk about being an adult, or we talk about whatever role that we're playing, parent, caregiver, we like have this seriousness about it, or we have to be like, and we forget like that actually like part of being alive is like also there's like this playful, like silly, childlike.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we do that, and we make it the intention to heal and connect with our inner child, is even more powerful, right? It just adds another layer in it. But I think absolutely is like going back to that who we are at our core,
Yes,
we all have a little one within, and that little one wants to be seen and acknowledged. And sometimes doing different things like this that are playful and fun is a way to acknowledge the little one within
and heal from the trauma that maybe our our smaller selves have experienced. I think it's tied into shame as well, right? And how our childhood might be filled with moments of profound trauma and shame that we lock our young self away, but that young self, or that inner child, is also part of our authentic self.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yes, absolutely. So beautiful. Our inner child is part of our authentic self. Yes. Yeah. I feel that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, Claudette, this was such a wonderful conversation. We never know how it's going to play out. We just kind of start talking, but this was great. I think we talked about a lot of really important topics. So thank you so much for being so generous, with your wisdom and your life experience, sharing it with us. I really, really appreciate it. So for the folks that are listening and would like to get to know you, or learn, or maybe read that article that you mentioned that you wrote, how can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram, Therapy with Claudette. So
I'll put it in the show notes also. Yeah, so the hyperlink.
Definitely. And people contact me through there. They can, if about questions, about connecting with therapy, about anything like that, people connect with me through there. I'm also on Latinx Therapy, the directory. Yeah, people usually find me there as well. And I wanted to say that, and the way that you kind of describe the podcast is a decolonized way, right? It's just kind of like we're having a conversation. There's no like
I haven't thought about it, but yeah, you're right.
There's no like, it's not like there has to be this like set clear path about them.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just whatever comes up. Yeah, exactly. And that's usually, especially conversations like this, you can't really plan it out. It's not like a Q&A. Well, tell me what tell me the definition of blah, blah. It's like, no, like, that's not what people want to hear. If people want to know about what the definition of whatever, they can just Google it. This is more about what your wisdom, your insight on decolonizing, or what, you know, shame, whatever we talked about today, you know, that's what really, I think that's what people connect to more than information or facts, you know.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much again, Claudette, and I hope to have a conversation like this with you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that you found it healing and nourishing to your mind and soul. If there's a friend that you think would benefit from listening to this information, please share it. Share about our podcast. If you feel called to, please leave us a review, as this really, really helps boost our presence here in Apple Podcasts, and it makes it easier for others to find us. To stay up to date on new episode releases and special events and projects that I'm working on, you can follow us on Instagram at Inner Healing Paths Podcast. And you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, which is rosachettilcsw.com. And I will include this information and links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing with you again next time.